Hello and welcome to another episode of Marty's Matchbox Makeovers. Today I shall be making over number 39B Pontiac Convertible, which first came out in 1962. So this model has been repainted by its previous owner in this horrible dark red colour. They've got some on the interior as well, which is a little bit disappointing. The windscreen is missing and the steering wheel is all wonky. The tyres are a little bit grubby and look aged, and the axles are rusty. So let's get into it. First up, drill out those rivets on the base, and that way I can start pulling this vehicle apart and get to work on it. First of all, the front rivet, and then the back. The order doesn't actually matter, but that's the way I did this one. I use a soft brush to sweep away all of the zinc filings. Then I use a small flat-bladed screwdriver to lever the base off. Once the base is off, I can upend the body and the interior falls out. This is what's remaining of the original windscreen. Now this is the interior, which as I mentioned before has got red paint on it, and that steering wheel has somehow been deformed. Maybe a child tried to wedge a soldier into it or something one day and bent the steering wheel. First up, I'm going to drill holes in those rivet posts so I can thread them, and that way I can use these small black screws to reassemble the model when it's finished. These screws are 2M screws and the threaded section is 4mm long. The drill that I'm going to use before tapping is a 1.6mm drill. This is the small tap that I'm going to use. I've ground the tip off of it so that it doesn't bottom out in the hole that I've drilled. I do a test fit of these screws. This one's a little bit too high, so I'm going to have to shorten it by grinding the tip off on a grindstone in my shed. I only need to take about 3 or 4 threads off, so I'm going to do that now. Always wear eye protection when you're working with a grinding wheel. As you can see, the metal filings bounce off in all directions, and you don't want to get one in your eye. Here's a bunch of screws that I have shortened on the right and the ordinary length ones on the left. Now let's try this out again. Perfect fit. Now I can move on to the next stage. Because these axles are bent and rusty, I'm going to cut them off this model and replace them with new ones made from pop rivets. The metal axles are extremely strong, and it's evidence of Matchbox's high quality of workmanship and why these vehicles have remained till today in relatively good condition. So here's the parts that are all ready to be cleaned and stripped of paint. Oh, here's Kevin the koala paying us a visit. Actually, he thinks he lives here. I think he's going to use our toilet. Looks like he's going to be in there a while. He's got a newspaper under his arm. I'm going to try and match the original colour paint before I strip the model. If I do it the other way round, then I have no reference to try and match the colour. I'm using this yellow and buff brown colour to try and make this vintage yellow that you can see on the inside of the body. I'm finding it rather difficult, the reason being I don't have any lemon coloured yellow. So try as I might, I can't quite get it right. And I end up nipping down to the hobby shop and buying myself a small pot of bright yellow. And eventually I get to something where I'm happy that it's close enough to the original for me to go forward. Using a coffee stirrer, I dab some blobs of paint on the inside of the model to see if I've got the colour right or not. Here's a close-up of the steering wheel. I've been trying to fathom out a way of fixing it. As you can see, it's moulded complete with the seats, and whoever worked in the factory would simply bend it up and seat it into position. Well, I've just cut it off and I'm going to heat it up with a heat gun that I found in my ensuite, and then try and place it onto something cold, and hopefully it will return to its original shape. I don't want to get this thing too hot because it could just melt into oblivion. I'm hoping these pliers instantly take the heat out of the plastic and flatten the steering wheel simultaneously. At first I thought I'd had a success, but then I noticed I could not get it exactly right, and try as I might, I failed time and time again. This was one stubborn steering wheel. The problem I had was that I was too scared to raise the heat setting on the heat gun in case I melted the steering wheel altogether, as that happened to me once before with another model. It was around about now I was thinking maybe I shall have a go at 3D printing a replacement. So that's what I did. I think it took only 6 minutes from start to finish. With my model of 3D printer, you have to use a razor blade to separate the printed item from the print bed. Here's a close-up of the steering wheel against the original. It's actually oversized and looks quite horrible. Luckily I remembered I had an interior from an ambulance that I'd ruined with boiling water from a previous restoration, so I robbed the steering wheel out of that, and although it's not a perfect match, I think it will look really good. Now I would like to show you my new custom camera stand. This is a fantastic, sleek and modern design that was easy to install and is easy to use. Now I can get the perfect shot every time from any angle. It was donated by Klaus Pack from KUP Solutions. If you want to buy one, contact Klaus at www.camfix.com. If you mention my name, he will knock 20% off the price. Thanks, Klaus! I've undercoated the body using Tamiya light grey undercoat. Now I'm going to top coat it with the yellow colour that I mixed up previously. First of all, I put a little bit of thinners in my airbrush just to clean it out. Sometimes it bungs up if you leave it for a little while unused. By the way, the paints that I mixed to make this yellow colour were Mr. Hobby water-based acrylics. I think that looks very nice and original. I use these magnetic paintbrush stands to hold my models when they're drying, and then I cover them with this glass dome to keep the dust off. For the base I use this standard aerosol can of satin black paint from a local hardware store. It only takes a couple of quick bursts and it looks like it's brand new.
Marty, if you mean the loo, it stinks.
No? Ah, that's Kevin! Ah. Now it's time to look at the replacement windscreen I got. The windscreen should be this clear green colour, but the replica one that I sourced online is clear. So I'm going to try and paint it. I'm using a little cheese dish here from a packet of crackers to do a test spray of this Tamiya clear green paint number X25. I'm thinning it down with some Tamiya thinners so that I can hopefully apply layer after layer until I get the desired effect. Here's my first attempt. I found that the effect looks better if the product is sprayed on the inside of the windscreen and not the outside. When it's sprayed on the inside of the windscreen, the clear plastic adds a high gloss finish to the outside and makes it look like an original coloured moulded part. Two of the tyres had some red paint on them, so I'm now cleaning that off with a cotton bud and some brake fluid. One of my subscribers recommended this. I've tried it before and it works quite well. Here you can see the red paint is readily coming off onto the cotton bud. When I'm happy they have no red paint left on them, I give the tyres a black wash, which consists of a thinned down gloss black paint. The interior had some red paint on it as well, and I also got that off with some brake fluid. I then washed it in some hot soapy water. Here is the original steering wheel. My heat treatment didn't make it turn out any better, so I was thinking maybe I should go with a 3D one, but looking at it, it's just way too big. Therefore, I'm going to use the steering wheel that I robbed out of the ruined ambulance interior. The only difference is the original one had 3 spokes and the one I'm using to replace it has got 4. But they are basically the same size. Because this is a separate item, I wedge it into the gap and then glue it into position using some modelling cement. After I've applied the glue, I then insert the steering wheel and make minor adjustments to the angle until I'm happy with how it looks. When I'm happy with the angle, I set it aside to dry. I'm happy with that. Now I'm going to make the replacement axles from these rivets. The rivets are slightly too large to go through the centre hole. I'm having to drill out the hole with a drill that is the same diameter as the rivet. This one measures 1.8 millimeters in diameter. I place the wheel on a small scrap block of wood and gently hold it with some pliers. I don't want to squeeze too hard because I may mark the tread of the tyre. Now it can fit onto the axle. I now do the other three. The rivet axles have a small deformed portion underneath the head. This is what holds the actual pot rivet in place before it is used. I file it down with a small file. This way the wheels can turn freely on the new axle. After I started the filing, I realised I had positioned the axle too high in the vise and there was a risk that I might bend it. Now that the burr has been filed off, the wheel turns freely. Now it's time to reform the end of the axle to prevent the wheels from coming loose. I cut them roughly to length using some side cutting pliers. I then take them out to my shed so that I can reform the ends of the axle to prevent the wheels from falling off. To do this, as many of you regular viewers will know, I use my drill press with two modified nails. With a little bit of pressure, the cut end of the axle is mushroomed over and looks very similar to a factory formed axle. So after I've done the front axle, now it's time to do the rear. For those that are interested, here's a close-up of the nail that I modified to use during this process. Here's an unmodified nail to give you an idea of the size of nail you need to buy if you want to replicate this method. With that all done, it's now time to reassemble the model. I've got rubber gloves on this time round because I don't want to leave fingerprints on the model itself. I have very oily skin and I find that if I don't wear gloves, even though the paint is dry, it can still leave fingerprints, which is obviously undesirable. So after aligning the windscreen and interior, I placed the base on. I then screw it together using these small button-headed screws that you saw earlier. It looks good too. I'm using a new hand chuck to do this. It's a lot easier than using a right-angled Allen key. There's one finishing touch, and that's the painting of the front grille and headlights. This is where you can make or break a model. Sometimes you have to go straight back to square one again. You have to be very careful not to get any silver paint where you don't want it. A few times I've stuffed up here and got silver paint on the body and I had to repaint the model from scratch. When I paint these details, I wear head-mounted magnifying goggles. Here I put a little bit too much silver paint on, so lucky I kept some of that yellow for just such an emergency. This time I'm being extra careful. I don't want now to put too much yellow on and then have to redo the silver. If that was to happen, I could be here for the rest of the evening and run out of paint. So this is what we started with. As you remember, the steering wheel was all wonky, the windscreen was missing, and somebody had painted it this horrible brick red. They'd also gone over the interior and wheels with some of that red paint. This is what it looks like now. Wow, what a transformation. This is now one hell of a good looking vehicle. Can't wait to take this one out for a spin. Here you can see Tyrone and Jamal out on the town. They are cruising the streets of Las Vegas, hoping to impress the ladies. Past the Paris Hotel and on to the Pizza Rock restaurant. It looks like tonight these guys will be having a table for two. Just a quick reminder to my Patreons, as this is the last video of the month, I have hidden this month's code word somewhere in the video. Head over to Patreon once you've found it and post the code on my page. The first one to post the correct code will win this month's giveaway, the Greyhound bus, one of my original makeovers. Thanks to all my Patreons for all your ongoing support. You are true fans and I really appreciate the patronage. Good luck everybody. Within 24 hours of getting the correct answer, I will announce the winner on my Patreon page. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Marty's Matchbox Makeovers. Hopefully there will be plenty more to come. See you next time. Goodbye. No.
Nearly, except you saw the end of your hand.
Oh, did you?
You got to about here, and
you
then
saw my wrist.
you saw your wrist.
Okay.
Wait, hang on. Give it like 1 second for me to stop talking.
And we need to hear you, so come closer. Can you see that? Yeah?
Now.
Okay.